In the Pacific Islands over the centuries, the islanders have developed ingenious ways of catching fish. Amazing as it may seem, some people use such unlikely things as spiders' webs and kites to catch their favorite fish. Other people use the claws of a giant shrimp to catch more members of the same weird family. Just as wild cattle are rounded up, the people in this village round up the fish they want, using a corral made of jungle vines. This man floats vines and nutshells on the water surface to outsmart the fish that he likes to eat. Ben and Lynn Krupp found many of these ingenious ways of catching fish here in the Enchanted Isles. Me savvy too much belong fish. That means I am smarter than the fish in Pidgin English. In the Trobriand Islands off the far eastern coast of Papua New Guinea, Ben and Lynn discovered just how true this old local saying is. Kitava is one of the smaller islands in the Trobriand group. It's very warm here all year round. The white sand beaches are fringed with palms, and the surrounding lagoon is crystal clear. To Ben and Lynn, it seemed about as close to paradise as you can get. The waters around the Trobriands are teeming with fish. Not surprisingly, the islanders have come to depend on these as a source of food. But fishing isn't just a means of survival for them. It's also a form of recreation. Over the centuries, the islanders have devised over 70 methods of fishing, each one for a different species. Out in the lagoon, for example, lives the alligator garfish, or long tom as we call it. It's good to eat, but hard to catch. So the villagers, not to be outdone, have invented an ingenious way of outsmarting them. Usually only a few people in the village specialize in each fishing method. The specialist in alligator garfishing is Gigarina. With his assistant, John Agabu, Gigarina searches the jungle for spiders' webs. To collect them, he uses a forked stick that has been bent and tied at the end. With the right knack, the web stretches out on the stick like wool on a spinning wheel. It's a very old method of fishing. It's been known to the villagers for generations. The web forms an almost continuous loop on the stick, and it must be removed very carefully. There's enough here for 3 lures. Each one is rolled off and tied securely. The lure will be attached to a kite that Gigarina has also made. It's a small kite, rather like the ones the children play with. The tail is made of banana leaf. In the old days, the kite would have been covered in banana leaf as well, but today it's easier to use plastic. The kite is flown before Gigarina paddles out. Suspended on a line from the kite is the lure. A second line runs back to Gigarina in the canoe. The technique is simple. Gigarina paddles up and down the lagoon diagonal to the wind, keeping the kite at just the right height so that the lure skips across the water. Strangely, the alligator garfish is the only fish that will go for this type of lure. The islanders must have studied the behavioral patterns of the fish very carefully. But bizarre as this method might seem, it does work. The sharp teeth of the garfish are its downfall. The spider's web might look delicate, but it's really very strong and slightly sticky. Once the lure catches in the fish's teeth, it has no chance of getting away. Gigerina keeps the kite flying, and the lure can be used again. An average morning's catch is not very high, it's only about 4 fish. But it's enough for the fisherman's needs, and there's always tomorrow. The islanders start learning the techniques of acquiring food from a very early age. The girls learn to grow simple crops like yams. The boys learn to hunt and fish. Local boys Kiro and Gowala are learning a fishing technique that uses the roots of the tuva vine. It's a common plant in the jungle, and the islanders have found that it's toxic to fish. Like many plants in the tropics, its roots are close to the surface, so they're easy to get at. The fibrous roots are beaten and pulped so that the sap is released. The leaves of the vine could also be used, but the sap in the roots is more potent. The best place to use the drug is in the shallows at low tide. The fish will be hiding in the coral outcrops and crevices around the reef. The drug works very quickly. It doesn't really poison the fish. It draws the oxygen from the water around the crevices and actually suffocates them. The catch isn't very big, but they'll still be eaten. The boys have a lot to learn, but now they've got the basic principles. And it's also been very enjoyable. Ben now moves further south, where he comes across an island of pearls. Next, on the Enchanted Isles. Off the Papua New Guinea coast near Samurai, Ben calls in at Pearl Island. The island is the center of the local cultured pearling industry. Australian expert Dennis George started the industry here in 1967, and later the Papua New Guinea government lent its support to the project. Dennis George is also teaching the local islanders the techniques of pearl culture. A number of small pilot farms are being set up for the purpose, and at present there are about 30 of them operating in various locations around the islands. The first stage in pearl culture is the collection of natural oysters. Like all the marine life here, the pearl oysters are abundant. Local divers using hooker gear, a direct airline from the boat, pick up gold lip oysters from the natural beds. The oysters are placed in tanks on the boat and transported to Pearl Island Farm. They are then transferred to special baskets suspended from a framework in the water before being seeded. Dennis George plans to produce commercial quantities of spherical pearls in the near future. For the moment, the farm is producing mainly half pearls. The process used to be a closely guarded secret, but that's a thing of the past. Dennis has agreed to show two of Ben's crew, Trina Fleischman and Ron Bell, how the seeding is done.
Now you can make two types of pearls out of that one. You can make the spherical pearl, which is a beautiful, pretty white, nice white one, big size, very valuable. And also you can make the blister pearls. Now what actually I'm doing, I'm inserting the inserts. So what actually I'm doing, I put on that holder, you have a spatula here, it's an old knife, and you drop the mantle, all right? After you drop the mantle, you bring your iron close, and you melt the glue. You see the little smoke coming out? That's from the process of the melting of the glue. Oh, that now fills, eh? That's good. That will go down for the production. Now you better sit and try yourself, see how you will make one, eh? And then when you make, you see that's a big special oyster for you. When you make one, you can come next year and harvest it, eh?
I think I will.
I'll just prepare it a little. Okay, now that's yours. Here is your instrument. Okay, let me get out. Inside. Okay, here you are. We have a new pearl technician here now. How you like it?
It's very nice.
Oh, try another one. Don't worry. Good. This is good. Yeah.
That's all I've had.
The half pearls are used in the making of jewelry, and the ones Dennis George makes are of the finest quality. If these are any example, it will be well worth it for Trina to come back next year and harvest her pearl. Ben moves on to Kirrawina, the largest island in the Trobriands. It's often referred to as the Island of Love, but the men do find ample time to pursue their love of fishing. Beautiful beaches and coral reefs run along the northern and eastern shores, and here there are good fishing grounds. The lagoons are protected from the big swells, so they provide food for the villagers all year round. The people often get together for a team effort. Ben came across this group doing some large-scale netting. The villagers lay their nets out in a big semicircle. They then drive their canoes towards the net from the other end of the lagoon and make as much noise as possible. The fish are frightened into the net, where the divers can easily spear them. The fish that aren't caught in the net dive for cover into the coral. But the divers make short work of them too. The people enjoy their work, and it's been a good catch today. They also enjoy singing, and they're quite happy to sing a song for Lynn. Ben and Lynn decide to explore the coral wonderland around the island. The beautiful reefs around Kirrawina are almost unspoiled, even though the Trobriand Islanders have been fishing them for centuries. The islanders have a close understanding of the sea. They realize that it's essential to their survival, so they can't afford to exploit it. The reef has been built up over thousands of years by tiny creatures called polyps. These plant-like creatures are really animals that surround themselves with a limestone skeleton. The reef is a haven and breeding ground for an infinite variety of creatures. Without the reef, most of them couldn't exist. Survival is the prime instinct of all the creatures on the reef. It's a constant cycle of life and death, and only the strong ones survive. The islanders could easily upset this delicate balance. In most parts of the world, humans have plundered the sea ruthlessly. But the Trobriand Islanders don't. They believe humans are part of nature, not above it. They take only what they need. Their equipment is primitive. It's probably the same as their forefathers used centuries ago. But the traditional method is effective enough. We'll see what happens when fishing traditions are ignored. Next, on the Enchanted Isles. The understanding that the Trobriand Islanders have of the sea and its creatures comes from generations of careful observation. If you want to catch a particular fish, you must first understand it, and then use the right technique. But traditions are sometimes forgotten. Just hanging a modern hook and line over the side will probably catch something eventually. But as many a Western fisherman has found, it's often nothing more than a cold. The giant potato cod have other ideas. They're too busy courting to worry about a bit of bait. It's going to be a long day. The courting ritual is hard work, so you've got to keep up your strength. A little sustenance is probably a good idea. The fisherman still thinks he's fishing, rather than just feeding the cod. He's going to need an awful lot of bait. Who's playing who is anybody's guess. The final score is potato cod 4, fisherman 0. It just goes to show that not all the islanders savvy too much belong fish. Ben and Lynn want a closer look at the sporty potato cod. Ben's third crew member, Wally Gibbons, takes down a bag of fish that might help them get acquainted. A good way to get to know them is to feed them by hand. This big fella must still be starry-eyed from all that courting. Ah, now he's got the right idea. Lynn has found another glutton. It's a moray eel, brought in by the promise of food. It's a bit shy, but a feed ought to help it overcome that. The eel can only just handle the fish, but it hasn't quite worked out what to do with the tail. The moray has a savage bite, but provided they're not startled, an experienced diver can approach them. Meanwhile, back at the cod, the crew are rapidly making friends. The potato cod live in most tropical waters, and Ben has always found them very friendly and more than happy to pose for the cameras. Sometimes they have to be directed to the right camera. And sometimes they can play a little rough. Strange creatures, and even stranger ways to catch them next on the Enchanted Isles. Ben and the crew have moved to the Solomon Islands, 800 kilometers east of the Trobriands. The people here also learn to fish and catch food when they're young. When Ben arrived here at New Georgia Island, the children were out on the reef flats learning how to handle the bow and arrow. When the adults go out to fish or hunt, they will often take a child with them. The child will be taught the basics of fishing, and he will also act as bailer if the canoe takes water. Only male children are taken because hunting and fishing are considered men's work only. As the children grow older, they become more skillful in the traditional ways of catching fish. Their methods might seem to be primitive, but their knowledge of the sea is vast and growing all the time. It's been passed on for generations. Understanding the behavior of the reef fish is an essential part of learning how to catch them. The goatfish, for example, gets its food by blowing away layers of sand on the bottom. The triggerfish lay their eggs in a hole dug in the sand. So, in the spawning season, that's where they're found. They're good eating, but at this time of year they can be aggressive and have to be approached carefully. This creature is a blenny. They dance over the sand, and they're too small to eat. Out in the shallows of Raviana Lagoon lives a very odd creature called a mantis shrimp. It's like something out of science fiction, but it's very good to eat. The shrimp lives in a deep hole in the sand, so it's difficult to get at. But the islanders have found a very interesting way of catching them. Shrimp hunting is done mainly by children. First, they have to catch their bait, and for that they need the help of a few adults. The small herring they need, called cut-fish, live in large schools in the lagoon, so the best way to catch them is by netting. The adults direct the operation while the children herd the fish into the net. A mandible claw from a previously caught manta shrimp is tied to the bottom of a stick. The stick is made from the center of a palm frond. A cut fish is then threaded on as bait. The holes the shrimp live in are easily seen. They're round and obviously not a natural formation. The children quickly learn to recognize them. A stick is placed in each hole and left. When they've used all their sticks, the kids just wait for a while. Soon, up comes the manta shrimp, looking even stranger out of the water than it does in. The shrimp are biting, So some of the boys go off to find more holes. Others stay behind to harvest the old. The back claws of the shrimps are broken off first because they can give a painful nip to the unwary. The front claws are then broken off to catch other shrimps with. When the shrimp reaches up the stick to get at the fish, the claw at the bottom catches on their underbody. They don't even get to eat the fish. The kids know when they have one hooked because the stick starts jiggling in the water. A shrimp can make a good-sized meal for one or even two people. Ben and the crew tried them, and they found they tasted something like a cross between a lobster and a prawn. No one was quite sure, but the general consensus was that they were very good eating. On the other side of New Georgia Island is Morova Lagoon. It's over 150 kilometers long, which makes it one of the largest lagoons in the world. At Bealey village, Ben found some people who are brilliant at fishing with a bow and arrow. Local villager Sungi was one of the best. But Ben discovered that Sungi is also the master of another method of fishing, using drugs. Sungi's brother is one of the most important people in the village, the canoe builder. He has a problem with wood rot in this one. The drug Sungi uses comes from the leaves of the bum vine. The method is similar to the one Ben saw in the Trobriands, except that the drug is used here to catch crayfish. Sungi and his brother Hugo crush the leaves and mix them with sand. That will help the drug disperse in the water. The brothers know that the best place to find crayfish is on the reef opposite the village. Ben has always had a taste for crayfish, so he's very interested in finding out how they catch them. Coming up next, on the Enchanted Isles. Hugo has found a spot where he thinks there will be a lot of crayfish. The crays come out at night to feed, but during the day they hide in deep crevices in the reef. As Hugo suspected, the crays are there. The drug is pushed into the coral. The sand will help it seep into the crevices. The drug doesn't kill the crayfish, but it makes them groggy enough to come out of their holes. They can still put up a good fight, but they're much more docile than normal. It looks like a good feed for dinner tonight. Ben moves on to Sandfly Passage in the Florida Group, about 40 kilometers north of the Solomon Islands capital, Honiara. At Togo village, here too the people have their own special methods of catching fish. The villagers use the overhanging trees as platforms to fish from. Huge schools of cut-cut and boomer fish congregate here close inshore. We call the cut-cut a herring and the boomer a yellowtail. They're small but very tasty. The fishermen use no bait, just a hook made from the shell of a pearl oyster. The hook flashing and shining in the water makes a good lure. The kids sometimes spend all day here just happily pulling in the fish. Togo village is full of children, so Ben and Lynn's baby son Dean joined some of the locals for a bit of a chat. He also tries a local drink, coconut milk, and obviously approves. When the villagers want to catch a large number of herring and yellowtail at once, they usually use a pyramid net. The overhanging tree is used to drop the net on the unsuspecting fish from above. After it's dropped, one side of the net is neatly flipped off the frame and the fish are trapped inside. The poor fish are out of the water so fast they must wonder what hit them. Opposite Togo village is another island called Gaskell. Frank Kyrie lives on the island, and his fishing specialty uses cut fish to catch alligator garfish. He first puts a fish onto a light hook. The line is made from a local vine, and the float is a nut from the koikoita tree. It's like the husk of a coconut, but it floats much better. Off the edge of the reef, Frank drops the floating lures about 50 meters apart. There's no line running to the boat. The lures will just drift with the current. Frank and his helper can now settle down to wait. While they're waiting, this odd contraption floats quietly by. The palm fronds are used as a makeshift sail. It's ideal for short passages. It can save a lot of paddling. At last, Frank has a strike. The weight of the nut tires the fish out. So all he has to do is collect it. The other lures are hit in quick succession. The method works because Frank knows that the fish like to feed on the surface. It's another example of the island fisherman being smarter than the fish. Accidents can easily happen while fishing. This boy has a fish hook embedded deep in his finger.
Well, we have to cut a little bit.
Lynn is a qualified nurse, and the villagers have asked for her help. A local anaesthetic eases the pain while she operates.
I'll see if I can pull it out now. You hold his hand steady.
Sarah?
There we are. It's out. You can look now.
A whole village cooperates to corral fish.
That's all right.
Next, on the Enchanted Isles. Cruising near Sandfly Passage, Ben comes across a pod of sperm whales heading east on their migratory path. They're mainly deep-water whales and often feed on giant squid. The monster squids really exist. Some years ago, Ben actually saw a 12-metre giant. Ben is now at Helita Village in the Florida group. He's come here to see a unique way of fishing that's only used by the villagers on special occasions. And today is such an occasion. It's the 7th of July, the anniversary of independence in the Solomon Islands. The village chief calls all the people together so the celebrations can begin. There's going to be a feast, and everyone in the village will help to catch the food. This fishing method uses long vines taken from the jungle. They're ravo vines, and they're pulled out in long lengths and dragged down to the beach. The vines are crushed at each end so that they can be tied together to form a single length. The vine is then dragged a long way out into the lagoon. This is usually done on the falling tide. At the same time, another vine is being put together in the same way about 400 meters down the beach. The two vines are joined together to form a large semicircle between it and the beach. Inside this area, a lot of fish are going to be trapped. The villagers start to tighten up the semicircle by moving closer to the beach and doubling up the vine on either side as they go. When it's been completely doubled, the vine is then tripled and then quadrupled as the semicircle tightens. The fish become progressively entrapped until eventually they have nowhere to go. It's hard work, but it's worthwhile. There are several hundred fish here, and most of them are a good size. Ben and the crew have been invited to join in the celebrations. The islanders are very patriotic and immensely proud of their cultural heritage. Independence has meant that the Solomon Islanders can control their own destinies for the first time since the start of the British colonial period 150 years ago. No celebration would be complete without singing and dancing, and the islanders love to do both. Independence Day is over for another year, but the preservation of island traditions will go on. The dozens of fishing techniques that have been passed on for generations are still going strong. It would be a tragedy if these precious traditions were lost. The islanders would be losing much more than skillful ways of catching their fish.